All right, we're going to get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Greta Zaro, and I'm the organizing director with World Beyond War, which is a global network to abolish the institution of war. I'm excited to welcome you to today's 1-hour webinar on Mayors for Peace and how you can get involved in municipal diplomacy. Thank you to the Florida chapter of World Beyond War and also the Veterans for Peace chapter 136 in the Villages, Florida, for co-sponsoring today's event. Before we get started, a few tech logistics. We are recording today's webinar. We will post the recording to World Beyond War's YouTube channel afterwards, and we'll also send out an email after the event with the link to the recording and some event resources. Please use the chat throughout the event to post comments and questions. We will get to those towards the end. And if you haven't yet, again, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and say where you're calling in from. Zoom captions should be enabled. Hold on, let me make sure those are enabled. There we go. Zoom captioning is now enabled for the event. You can click on the CC Live Transcript button to view the captions. And if you don't see that button, sometimes you have to click on the 3 dots and then you'll see more options and you can click on captions. And a reminder that the captions are done by robots, so please excuse any errors with the transcription. So now I would like to welcome our 2 speakers. First, we have Larry Gilbert, who is a Vietnam War veteran. He served 25 years on the Lewiston, Maine Police Department, working his way up to Chief of Police, serving in that capacity for 5 years. He was then appointed by President Bill Clinton to serve as the U.S. Marshal for the District of Maine for 8 years. Afterward, he served 5 years as the Associate Director of the Maine Community Policing Institute at the University of Maine. And he then served 5 years as mayor of the city of Lewiston, Maine. He is retired and lives in the Villages, Florida, for 8 months out of the year and the other 4 months in Maine. And he is a co-coordinator of the World Beyond War Florida chapter. So welcome, Larry, and thank you for initiating today's event.
Thank you. Thank you, and great to be here with everyone. And I see some that I know, so that's great.
Wonderful. And our keynote speaker today is Jackie Cabasso, who has been the executive director of the Western States Legal Foundation based in California since 1984. In 1995, she was a founding mother of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to eliminate nuclear weapons, where she continues to serve on its coordinating committee. Jackie also serves as National Co-convener of United for Peace and Justice. She was the 2008 recipient of the International Peace Bureau's Sean MacBride Peace Award, and since 2007, she has served as North American Coordinator for Mayors for Peace. So welcome, Jackie, and we look forward to your presentation. First, we will briefly turn it over to Larry, who will talk about his experience as a mayor and how he got involved with the Mayors for Peace initiative. So go ahead, Larry.
Thank you, Greta. It's a pleasure being here with everyone. And so how I became a member of Mayors for Peace. As Greta mentioned, I'm also a member of World Beyond War and Veterans for Peace in Maine, as well as here in Florida. But when I was serving as mayor in 2008, a friend told me about this Dr. Bernard Lown. And he said that we had a bridge between the cities of Lewiston and Auburn in Maine, and it was known as the South Bridge. It had no name. So he said, I'd like to see that name named after Dr. Bernard Lown. And Dr. Bernard Lown started with his Russian counterpart cardiologist, the organization called International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. And together, and by the way, the Russian cardiologist, Dr. Chazov, was a cardiologist for Gorbachev. And they grew their organization to 150,000 physicians worldwide. And in 1985, they were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So Dr. Lown had arrived from Lithuania at age 13 and went to school at Lewiston High School. He graduated there in 1938 and then went on to the University of Maine and then on to medical school and so on. So, so I contacted him. I didn't know if he was still alive or not, because at the time he was 86 years old. By the way, he just died a year and a half ago at 99 years old. And so I spoke to him and asked if he would allow us to name the bridge in his honor, and he said he would be honored. So we developed a friendship, and in fact, we did in fact name that bridge the Bernard Lown Peace Bridge, where there are monuments at both ends of the bridge. And so we became friends over the years, and he became like a father image to me. So he told me that, he says, you're going to get a letter from the mayor of Hiroshima, and he's going to invite you to join Mayors for Peace. And sure enough, I got a letter from Mayor Tadashi Akiba of Hiroshima, Japan. And so I was invited to join, and I in fact did join and became a member. And so this past summer, Veterans for Peace and Peace Action Maine, we had, for the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, we had a Remembrance Day, and it was to remember Dr. Bernard Lown and to remember the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We had a wonderful event. And so, Mayor Akiba sent me a letter, but I wanted to know, so recently I contacted Mayor Akiba and asked him how he and Dr. Lown got to know each other. So he responded by saying, I was part of the Boston, Cambridge area peace and disarmament groups. I was also the founder of the American coordinator of a program to invite international journalists to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Through the contacts from these activities, I became part of IPPNW, International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. As a volunteer, part of a volunteer group preparing for its first meeting in Arley House in Virginia. And he says, Dr. Lown and I kept in touch over the years, and he helped me, he helped Mayors for Peace to reach more cities through his contacts around the world. So at that event, I asked Mayor Akiba if he would write a letter that we could present. So I'll read you most of it here. And he wrote, it is an honor and a pleasure to send this message from Hiroshima on August 6th, remembering Dr. Bernard Lown and renaming the former South Bridge as the Bernard Lown Peace Bridge is especially timely this year when the Ukraine crisis continues. As you know, at the height of the Cold War, Dr. Lown and Dr. Chazov collaborated to create a genuinely humanistic organization that would save humanity rather than continue to work in the framework of East-West confrontation. They deserve the Nobel Peace Prize, but also triggered the US and USSR summit in 1986 in Reykjavik, Iceland, where President Reagan and Secretary Gorbachev agreed to abandon all nuclear weapons they possessed. The military-industrial complex squashed their agreement. Still, the courage and insight of two leaders show us that we can abolish nuclear weapons and bring peace to Ukraine and other areas of the world that suffer from violence, injustice, plague, poverty, and other forms of tragedies and pains. We need to urge the governments of the US and other nuclear weapon states, as well as Japan and other nuclear dependent states, to ratify the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I believe that adopting the no first use policy by the nuclear weapon states might be a more realistic intermediate goal and would naturally need to ratification. So he wrote, your gathering in Lewiston and march to the Peace Bridge is a precious symbol of and a solid message to all of us in the world who are working conscientiously and strenuously to build a peaceful world without nuclear weapons. So this here is our goal. It's a goal of weapons, Mayors for Peace. It's a goal of IPPNW. It's a goal of World Beyond War and Peace Action and a whole host of other organizations. And all we need to do is convince our leaders. And that's the sad part, because it's this whole thing about power at the peril of the people they serve. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Jackie Cabasso, who I got to know again through Mayors for Peace, and she is the coordinator or whatever for Mayors for Peace throughout the United States. So Jackie is in, I think, Oakland, California.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got both coasts covered.
Thank you very much, Larry. And thanks to World Beyond War and Veterans for Peace in Florida and nationally for inviting me to speak to you today. So all I need to do is pull up my remarks. Yes. So I'm going to start off with a few brief examples of municipal diplomacy. In the 1980s, lots of city-based local organizing initiatives, including anti-apartheid divestment campaigns, were underway in the United States. 130 plus US cities declared themselves to be local nuclear weapon free zones and formed a network called Nuclear Free America. There was even a magazine called Municipal Diplomacy. And in the early 2000s, many cities passed resolutions in opposition to the US war on Iraq as part of the Cities for Peace campaign. So jumping ahead in time, in a 2017 article entitled States and Cities Saying No to the Feds by Kirkpatrick Sale, he described a growing trend towards what he called nullification of federal laws and policies by cities and states. And it seems that in a time when the federal government and Congress are increasingly dysfunctional and unresponsive to the needs of people, there's a tremendous opportunity as well as a need to organize and build grassroots power at the local level. The response by US mayors to Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord in 2017 is a striking example. In their statement, they said, as 362 US mayors representing 66 million Americans, we will adopt, honor, and uphold the commitments to the goals enshrined in the Paris Agreement. We will intensify efforts to meet each of our city's current climate goals, push for new action to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, and work together to create a 21st century clean energy economy. Now, other examples of municipal diplomacy include sanctuary cities, local minimum wage laws, local marijuana laws, local gun laws, healthcare, and so on. So why shouldn't federal spending priorities and nuclear disarmament advocacy not be subject to the same kind of municipal diplomacy? Mayors for Peace was established in 1982 during the second special session on disarmament at the United Nations in New York, when the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki announced their program to promote the solidarity of cities toward the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and issued a joint call to cities everywhere to support this program. According to its covenant, quote, Mayors for Peace, through close cooperation among the cities that support the program to promote the solidarity of cities toward the total elimination of nuclear weapons, strives to raise international public awareness regarding the need to abolish nuclear weapons, and contributes to the realization of genuine and lasting peace by working to eliminate starvation and poverty, assist refugees fleeing local conflict, support human rights, protect the environment, and solve other problems that threaten peaceful coexistence within the human family, end quote. Today, Mayors for Peace is working for a world without nuclear weapons, safe and resilient cities, and a culture of peace in which peace is a priority for every individual. As of February 1st, 2023, Mayors for Peace has grown to 8,237 cities in 166 countries and territories, representing in total over 1 billion people. With 223 US members, Mayors for Peace's next membership goal is to reach 10,000 member cities as quickly as possible. So my question to you folks today is, can we recruit 50 new US members by the end of this year? And I'll be presenting a toolkit for that purpose a little bit later. Over its 40-year history, Mayors for Peace has organized or been involved in hundreds of major events, ranging from diverse memorial gatherings commemorating the US atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to protests against French, Russian, and US nuclear weapons tests, to numerous appeals submitted to the United Nations in New York and Geneva. The mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have just issued a joint appeal on the invasion of Ukraine as it approaches the one-year mark. What must be done to prevent a third nuclear attack? And I'll put a link in the chat a little bit later. In 2006, Mayors for Peace organized events commemorating the 10th anniversary of the International Court of Justice's opinion on the illegality of nuclear weapons under international law. Mayors met in The Hague, where they launched a good faith challenge, challenging the governments to live up to their obligations under customary international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as part of a Cities Are Not Targets project. And it was really an honor to work for Mayor Akiba for many years. And as he explained at the time, quote, when one contemplates nuclear weapons, one contemplates the fate of cities and civilization itself. Cities, citizens, civilian, and civilization all derive from the same Latin root. Cities were the cradle of every civilization, and that is just as true today. For all their many problems, modern cities are the repositories of everything that makes civilization possible. They are where the concept of law first took root and where the highest courts of law are found today, everywhere in the world. Indeed, it was legal institutions that made cities possible. As the cities led the world in economy, art, education, and many other worthy fields, the cities in the 21st century are to lead the world in most of these areas. As a matter of fact, we have come to the conclusion that the 21st century is one of cities. While we have been raised to look to our national governments to provide security and prosperity, perhaps it's time to look a little deeper. Cities need to step forward to support international efforts, especially when the nation state is failing to deliver. Through our Cities Are Not Targets project, cities across the world will break out of the Cold War spell and mutiny against the tyranny of nuclear madness. We will no longer be the docile hostages to such inhuman and illegal threats. Good faith is an essential part of any functioning society. A mayor is entrusted with the faith and fate of the citizens. It is not enough for the mayor not to break the law. The mayor must act in good faith at all times, even when tempted by power and wealth to do otherwise. Our proximity as mayors to our citizens makes mayors honest and therefore makes it easier to carry out their obligations of good faith. Now, due to time constraints, I won't go into the dismal state of nuclear disarmament today, but I'll post a link to my recent op-ed in the chat. Suffice it to say, on January 24th of this year, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved the hands of its iconic doomsday clock forward, largely, though not exclusively, because of the mounting dangers of the war in Ukraine. The clock now stands at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest to global catastrophe it has ever been. According to Mayor Frank County of Des Moines, Iowa, the US Vice President of Mayors for Peace, quote, mayors have an essential role to play in international diplomacy. Whether talking about the climate crisis or nuclear war, cities are where the consequences of national governmental actions are likely to have their consequences, and mayors are the first responders. If you don't think nuclear weapons are a local issue, ask the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Going back to the climate accord, he said, I believe that it was local governments that caused the Paris Climate Agreement to happen. We showed heads of state what happens and why we at the local government level support the engagement of all heads of state into the Paris Climate Agreement. Without that support, without mayors going to their heads of state and telling them the consequences of not committing to that agreement, it would not have happened. We had over 500 mayors in Paris to support it from around the world, not just from the US, but from Africa, Asia, South America, all continents. It was everybody coming together. We need to do that on all subjects, all of us working together and showing the local commitment and the need to work for peace, the need to work for climate stabilization that are so imperative to the future of this planet, end quote. So now I will introduce you to the Mayors for Peace Action Kit. So give me a moment to share my screen. Okay, share. All right, can folks see this? Of course, you're muted, so how I know.
Yep, we can see it fine, thanks.
Okay, very good. Okay, so this is a toolkit that I have put together with the idea of giving people the tools, information, and ideas about how to engage with their mayors and with some other municipal initiatives, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So here's as I mentioned, there are 8,237 cities in 166 countries and regions. Here you can see the breakdown. But here's a map, which I think you might find very interesting. These are the top 10 countries in terms of the number of member cities. So Japan, well, we're not surprised to see 1,737 Japanese mayors. But how about Iran? That might surprise you, over 1,000 cities in Iran. Germany, 846, Italy, 520, Spain, 401, Belgium, 395, Netherlands, 171, just beating out France at 170, Nicaragua, 155. Every city in Nicaragua is a member. And in the US, we have 223. So my hope is, my challenge is, let's see if we can't up our ante a little bit here and recruit 50 new member cities. So now where did that link go? Okay, I want to show you this one link here, how this throws people off. So you can click here, and this will take you to the North America page on the Mayors for Peace website, but you'll see Canada here. So what you have to do is go to the US, and then you'll see the names of the cities in alphabetical order. You can also search for them and the year and month in which they joined. Let's see, how do I get back? Oh, no. All right. That should do it. Okay. I also have a current list of US member cities organized by state, which I will post in the chat. So if you go through here, here's a 10-minute introductory video with the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Mayor County, and mayors from around the world explaining why Mayors for Peace is important to them. Now in the US, the most visible success we've had is getting the US Conference of Mayors to adopt resolutions that are introduced by US members of Mayors for Peace. So the US Conference of Mayors is the nonpartisan association of over 1,400 US cities with populations over 30,000. And they have unanimously adopted these bold Mayors for Peace resolutions for 17 consecutive years. These resolutions become official US Conference of Mayors policy, and theoretically, the US Conference of Mayors lobbies on them. They have a big lobbying operation. They lobby for all kinds of things, community block development, grants, environmental programs, and so on. But I don't think that we have made enough noise for them to actually actively lobby on these, but we can use them. So this one, I'm going to spend a few minutes on because I think it's highly relevant to where a lot of people are coming from. This resolution was adopted in June of 2022 by the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It's titled Forging a Path to Peace and Common Security. Addressing the need for common security, the resolution, quote, calls on the President and Congress to exercise restraint in U.S. military engagement in Ukraine while maximizing diplomatic efforts to end the war as soon as possible by working with Ukraine and Russia for an immediate ceasefire and negotiations with mutual concessions in conformity with the United Nations Charter, knowing that the risks of wider war grow the longer the war continues. And then it goes on, again, quote, calls on the United States and the other nuclear armed states parties to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to implement their disarmament obligations by committing to a process leading to the adoption no later than 2030 of a time-bound plan for the global elimination of nuclear weapons by 2045. And then addressing the need for human security, the resolution, quote, calls on the administration and Congress to rein in military and nuclear weapons spending and to redirect funds to support safe and resilient cities and meet human needs, including by providing accessible and affordable health care for all, housing and food security, green sustainable energy, and environmental protection and mitigation, and to increase investment in international diplomacy, humanitarian assistance and development, and international cooperation to address the climate crisis, end quote. The resolution, the Mayor's Peace resolution adopted by the 2021 U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting was titled Calling on the United States to welcome the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and to act now to prevent nuclear war and eliminate nuclear weapons. The Mayor's Peace resolution adopted the previous year in 2020, calling for human-centered security in a time of global pandemic, affirmed for the third time the U.S. Conference of Mayors' support for the Back from the Brink campaign. So let me skip ahead for a minute and come back because I put together, we have an action opportunity now with the Back from the Brink campaign, but in case people don't know about it, Back from the Brink is a US-based grassroots coalition of individuals, organizations, and elected officials working together toward a world free of nuclear weapons and advocating for common sense nuclear weapons policies to secure a safer, more just future. Back from the Brink calls on the United States to lead a global effort to prevent nuclear war by actively pursuing a verifiable agreement among nuclear armed states to eliminate their nuclear arsenals, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first, ending the sole unchecked authority of any US president to launch a nuclear attack, taking US nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert, and canceling the plan to replace the entire US nuclear arsenal with enhanced weapons. More than 70 cities, towns, counties, and states have passed Back from the Brink resolutions. More than 400 organizations have endorsed Back from the Brink. 68 countries have ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and 24 more have signed. And as I said, the U.S. Conference of Mayors welcomed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in a 2021 resolution and has endorsed the Back from the Brink in 3 annual resolutions submitted by Mayors for Peace. Now I'll come back to Back from the Brink, but I wanted to make sure people know what it is. So here's the thing. If we want to recruit 50 new US mayors, the first thing is to find out if your mayor is a member for Peace, and I showed you that. If they're not a member, please invite them to join, and here, click here, you get a letter of invitation from the current Hiroshima mayor, Kazumi Matsui, president of Mayors for Peace, and information about how to register and examples of member cities' activities. Now, here's where we get into the kind of synchronicity, hopefully. If you're planning to ask your city council to adopt the Back from the Brink resolution or the ICAN Cities Appeal, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons as a city's appeal, getting cities to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or some combination of both, you can ask your mayor to join Mayors for Peace at the same time. Even better, if you're asking your mayor to join Mayors for Peace, include an operative clause in your resolution, making it city policy for the mayor to join Mayors for Peace. You can cite recent U.S. Conference of Mayors resolutions and quote from them in your local resolution. There's lots of great language. Or if your mayor is already a member of Mayors for Peace, you can ask them to actively support adoption of your resolution by the City Council. You can take copies of recent U.S. Conference of Mayors resolutions to meetings with members of Congress or their staff, included in correspondence with members of Congress or their staff, also members of Congress and state legislators, and refer to and quote from these resolutions in articles, op-eds, and letters to the editor. Now, here are things that mayors can do with the support of local peace and disarmament groups. And I want to stress this. They're not going to do anything unless they get asked and perhaps even pressured by local groups who are keeping track and who want them to do things. But these are just some things they can do. In terms of public education, plant a seedling from an A-bomb tree at a public location with a ceremony. Hold an A-bomb poster exhibit in City Hall or a public location. The Mayors for Peace Secretariat can provide these materials. Issue a proclamation on the Hiroshima Nagasaki anniversary. Many mayors do that already. Place educational resources in public libraries. Host a town hall meeting. Host a film showing or a film series. Publish an op-ed in a local newspaper. Sign and promote the Mayors for Peace petition, calling for all states to join the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons as soon as possible. And there are a lot more ideas on the Mayors for Peace website, and also examples of what cities around the world are doing. Mayors can also, so that's what mayors can do for public education. Mayors can work with their city councils to pass a resolution in support of the Back from the Brink campaign or the I Can Cities appeal or hybrid. Work with your city council to hold a city budget hearing on the local impacts of nuclear weapons and military spending. And if they want to get really ambitious, divest city funds from nuclear weapons producers and investors. And a good resource for that is Don't Bank on the Bomb. Again, things mayors can do with the support of their local peace and disarmament groups. Lobby the federal government. Join with other Mayors for Peace members to lobby Congress using the U.S. Conference of Mayors and municipal resolutions. Recruit your congressional representatives and senators to join parliamentarians for nuclear nonproliferation and disarmament, and sign the ICAN parliamentary pledge. And mayors do have relationships with members of Congress. Mayors can contact the U.S. Mayors for Peace Vice President, Mayor Frank County of Des Moines, Iowa, and let him know you're interested in getting involved. Put a Mayors for Peace logo on the city's or the mayor's website. Organize a regional Mayors for Peace meeting. Again, that can be done with the assistance of and support of local groups. And recruit more members for Mayors for Peace from their counties, from their states, and so on. So there's lots of ideas on the Mayors for Peace website. And I point particularly to the monthly news flash and member cities activities, where you can see what cities around the world are doing. So if you're interested in finding out more and maybe getting involved, I invite you to join a new Mayors for Peace interest group, which is a moderated listserv, a Google group, where we can exchange information, ideas, best practices, questions, and that sort of thing. And I'm always available for if I can assist you locally. Now, I want to come back to this February-March action opportunity. So I've explained what Back from the Brink is. This is really exciting news. On January 31st, Representative Jim McGovern and Representative Earl Blumenauer introduced HRES 77 in the House of Representatives, which calls on the U.S. to embrace the goals and provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and to adopt Back from the Brink's comprehensive policy prescriptions for reducing nuclear risks and preventing nuclear war. The resolution, quote, calls on the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, all other federal and congressional leaders of the United States and the American people to lead a global effort to move the world back from the nuclear brink and to prevent nuclear war by actively pursuing and concluding negotiations on a new bilateral nuclear arms control and disarmament agreement with the Russian Federation before 2026. Very critical now that Russia has suspended its participation in the START treaty. and pursuing negotiations with China and other nuclear armed states on an agreement or agreements for the verifiable, enforceable, and underscore time-bound elimination of global nuclear arsenal. And that is an idea that came originally from Abolition 2000. So Back from the Brink is using HRES 77 as a grassroots organizing and advocacy tool to stimulate real debate about nuclear weapons in communities around the country. So it fits in perfectly with this idea of municipal diplomacy and recruiting mayors. So there are two things you can do. You can write to your, if you, as an individual, you can write to a U.S. House representative and ask them to take the first step and co-sponsor HRES 77. And if you're with an organization, you can ask your organization to sign on to a congressional sign-on letter by March 3rd. And again, these links will take you there. I will put these links in the chat, but also Greta has a whole set of these materials that she'll send out with the recording. So how am I doing for time? Not bad. So maybe I'll stop here and we can do some Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jackie. And yeah, as you said, we will send out the recording afterwards and we'll have that toolkit in the follow-up email so people don't have to worry about trying to take down all those links right now. But I guess I especially wanted to kind of echo what you said about how, you know, there's various synergies that I think could really happen with these movements, because there are, you know, as you mentioned, the Back from the Brink, Mayors for Peace, the TPNW campaigns. With World Beyond War, we work a lot on divestment campaigns, and I see some people on the call who are part of our divestment work in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is a great example because it signed on to Mayors for Peace many years ago. It a few years ago passed a resolution in support of the TPNW. And so now we're working on divestment and we're kind of using that history to make our case to say, you've already signed on to Mayors for Peace, you've already endorsed the TPNW, you know, now take the next step and divest from nuclear weapons. So this can be a really great building block.
Excellent.
So with that, I want to turn it over to the Q&A. People attending, please put your questions and comments in the chat box for us, and we will read those off. And I will introduce my colleague, Mark Elliott Stein, who is World Beyond War's Technology Director, and he'll be reading off the questions and moderating the Q&A. So go ahead, Mark.
All right, well, thank you. And I learned a lot. I'm also very inspired now to know what Mayors for Peace is doing. And I definitely see the sense behind it. The mayors are close to where the people are and have a voice. That's great. I'm going to go back to one of the earliest questions here from Hiroaki Nakanishi. Are you aware of the new reality that Russia is suspending the implementation in the New START treaty? Can we unite for supporting and pushing a voluntary declaration of nuclear deterrence? There's a long question in the chat, but that's the gist of it. And I'll throw that open, I think, first to you, Jackie, and then Larry, if you want to say anything as well.
The gist of the question is, can we get behind a joint declaration to what?
Well, I think the gist of the question is the really shocking degradation of the world's nuclear, you know, which you referred to already, that happened this week. So I think maybe it's an invitation to talk about the news this week that Russia is suspending participation in the START treaty. And, you know, just how are you reacting to that, and what can we think about this?
Well, it's definitely another downward step. Mayors, the U.S. Conference of Mayors in previous years' resolutions have specifically called for extension of the START treaty. So it's something that we've addressed, but I think you need to look at, you know, I invite everybody to read the resolutions from the last few years that are in the toolkit. They're linked there to see the breadth of it, because it really is, they really are providing a prescription for what needs to happen to come back from the brink. And they're very detailed in their policy recommendations. You know, I think that I was hoping that the negotiations to extend New START might serve as a beginning of a bridge to open up the possibility of negotiations to get a ceasefire in Ukraine and start the very, very complicated process of negotiating a settlement there. But this is another indication that that's not in the cards. So it's discouraging. But let me just say this, this might be somewhat controversial. People may not be aware of this, but the START Treaty itself is a very flawed treaty, because while it caps the number of long-range deployed weapons, warheads, it doesn't actually eliminate any nuclear weapons, and it doesn't address anything but this category of so-called strategic deployed nuclear weapons, long-range nuclear weapons. And it was adopted with conditions by the US Senate, which actually drove the arms race forward. The massive amounts of spending for modernization, for missile defenses, and proclaiming the right to keep, control of space. Well, those are like all red flags for Russia. Well, the Russian Duma did the same thing when they ratified it. So it came with a lot of conditions that, in the absence of other kinds of forward-looking arms control and disarmament negotiations, actually hindered disarmament. So I think when we're thinking about advocating for and supporting future arms control and disarmament negotiations, we need to try to make sure they're not conditioned on factors that are going to impede their effectiveness for their intended purposes.
Okay, well, very interesting. That's definitely a
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, we seem to have lost Mark. Mark, while you're trying to get back on the call, I can follow up with another question I'm seeing in the chat, which is a question actually about Philadelphia and the fact that, Philadelphia has signed on, but essentially, the mayor has not really responded to any inquiries about it, about Mayors for Peace, and is not really involved. And the question is, how can we change that for those mayors that have signed on? How can we actively engage them? And I think, Jackie, you provided several examples in the toolkit, but if you'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, well, Philadelphia is a member of Mayors for Peace, but there's a bit of a squishy nature to Mayors for Peace membership, because from Mayors for Peace point of view, once a mayor joins, then he or she, his or her successors are considered to be members forever unless they withdraw. So a lot of mayors, I suspect, don't even know they're members. Some mayors who are more engaged will actually brief their successors, before they leave office. But again, it seems to me it's the absence of, or the need for, well-organized, visible, persistent watchdog activities by community groups. And we really haven't had that in a meaningful way for many years now. In the 1980s, during the height of the anti-nuclear movement, you could gather up large groups of citizens to go and talk to their mayors or whatever it was that we were doing. And so we kind of need to rebuild that infrastructure, I think. And that's one of the things I'm hoping this Mayors for Peace interest group will provide, is if we can provide each other with some success stories or some questions or suggestions or whatever.
Yeah, and maybe Larry, you might want to respond to that too, like in terms of that successor piece, like when you handed over the torch, how did that process work, and did you get buy-in from your successor?
Unfortunately not. Philosophically, we were opposites, and so that didn't happen. So I do see a question here from a Larry Berman. It says here, the mayors of what region or country would be most effective in persuading Russia i.e. Vladimir Putin, to go along with a reduction in threats of using nuclear weapons?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, we have Russian member cities, and during the 90s and into the early 2000s, when there really was a vibrant civil society in Russia, and the city of Volgograd was a very active vice president of Mayors for Peace. And in recent years, they have indicated to us that it's been increasingly difficult for them to say anything or do anything because there's so much repression of non-governmental organizations there. And this is true of other NGOs as well. So it's just I mean, that I think it would have to be the mayors in Russia, and they're in a somewhat dangerous situation in terms of speaking out, unfortunately. I mean, I think also another answer to that is global public opinion, has to be very clear that we won't tolerate these threats. Yeah, and we want negotiations now.
If I may, I wanted to say I'm sorry for dropping off. I actually stupidly kicked my power switch and turned off my internet.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, director of technology here. Well, what can I say? But I am actually, it means that I lost my chat record. So I don't think I should. I do see people popping up with questions, but I think it might be better for somebody else because I actually lost the list of questions, but I am eagerly awaiting more of this conversation, and I'm sorry about that.
No worries, Mark. It's okay. Things happen. But yeah, if any new questions come in, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I can read the ones that have come in already. So one of the questions is, does Mayors for Peace occasionally send information to member mayors? How do you engage with those mayors that are already members?
There is a monthly electronic newsletter that goes to all of them. And there's a general conference every 4 years that alternates between Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which all members are invited to. So there are regular communications, but again, there could be more, and there could be more generated at the local level that would help. One thing I reflect on a lot is that actually North America also includes Canada for me. This is a huge country, and one person can only do so much, so we need to build the network of support.
Well, I receive that newsletter every month, and I share it with other organizations.
That's great.
Well.
Fantastic.
And Larry, while you're unmuted, there's been a question about the Peace Bridge in Maine that you mentioned. If you could say, where exactly is that located? We have people who are in Maine or who visit Maine, and they say that they want to visit the Peace Bridge.
Yes, I highly encourage that. So if you're coming from Interstate 95 heading north in Maine, exit 80, which is 80 miles into Maine from New Hampshire, and you head towards downtown. And once you get to downtown, you go down the hill into downtown. The first signal, you turn left on Cedar Street and just go down the hill, and you'll have to cross the bridge into Auburn, so the city of Auburn. And so there's a monument at both ends of the bridge, and it talks about the organizations that Dr. Lown was a part of creating, like Satellite for medical, using the satellites to share information with African countries and so on. So this man is just, he's the the brightest man I've ever met, and the man with the most wisdom. And he could challenge you with questions too, so it was good.
Wonderful. I hope people
And
will
by the
go
way,
and visit the bridge.
his wife Louise, that he called Saint Louise, for putting up with him, but she was as much an activist as he was. So
That's great. Thanks. Okay, we have a lot more questions coming in. So there's been a question kind of about different positions that the Mayors for Peace could take. Like, would the Mayors for Peace support the Pope's call for an immediate ceasefire and negotiations, or would the Mayors for Peace support an investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline explosion? So I guess, Jackie, you talked a bit about the conference of mayors taking these positions and passing these resolutions, but does Mayors for Peace ever take positions as an
They do.
organization?
And yes, in fact, they, as I mentioned, the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki just issued a statement on Ukraine. They do issue statements and letters. There's a section on the website. You know, when the examples you gave are you know, challenging. I could imagine, for example, that supporting the Pope's call might be something that could be included in a U.S. Conference of Mayors resolution. I would suspect that at this point, fairly early in this, that calling for an investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline might be too controversial. I don't know. I mean, that would have to be road tested with the mayors. But that gives me an opportunity to say this, though. There will be another annual resolution coming up in June, and so starting in May, probably I will be circulating. I will work with Mayor County on the draft, and when he finalizes the draft, I'll be circulating it for co-sponsors. And if you look in the toolkit again, or not the toolkit, but I put in a link to the press release from this year's resolution. You can see who the co-sponsors were. And we like to get as many co-sponsors as possible. That's one of the ways that we can show support. It's also a way to get buy-in from that particular mayor that we can then follow up with. Well, you supported this, so will you sign this? I should also mention that the Back from the Brink campaign is also about to be inviting prominent individuals to sign a letter of support for HRES 77, and that will include mayors. That's another opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to ask sort of how the logistics work. So you're saying that, basically mayors have to like opt in to co-sponsoring it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's no requirement from the U.S. Conference of Mayors. One mayor can co-sponsor, but I like to, get as many as we can, sometimes as many as 24, which just shows that there's actually some support behind it. I saw the question about China. Let me respond to that. There are members of Mayors for Peace in China. One of the things that Mayor Akiba did while he was still in office was go to China and recruit members. And I think there's a lot more possibility of U.S. mayors communicating with Chinese mayors than with Russian mayors at this point. For one thing, there are mayoral trade delegations go to China all the time. And then there's also, we haven't talked about Sister Cities International, but one thought, and they actually did a webinar featuring Chinese mayors fairly recently, which was very interesting. Again, mostly about trade stuff, but one thing I've thought about is trying to get some kind of a statement by mayors like U.S. Chinese, well, at the time, Russian, of course, that's probably not possible now. But anyway, to try to encourage those kind of relationships, explore find out who, if your city has sister cities, find out where they are and who they are. And if they're not, if one or the other is a member of Mayors for Peace, get the other, get them to invite each other, that kind of thing. There's a possibility there for a lot of synergy as well. And that just reminded me one other thing I did want to say. So, the world looks pretty terrible right now, but there have been brighter moments. And so I would say maybe 10 years ago, or 10 to 12 years ago, that we had an active campaigner in Israel with the Israeli disarmament movement, who recruited a whole bunch of mayors, both Israel, in the state of Israel, and in the Palestinian territories, about half and half. And there was for a short period of time, there was a real sense of possibility and hope that things were going to improve in that region. But the mayors were certainly one component of the populations who could, interact with each other in a positive way. I think there are about 40 Israeli mayors and about 40 Palestinian mayors, if I'm remembering.
Jackie, do you still have that list? That list of mayors in Israel, Palestine?
Oh yeah, they're all on the website. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, there's a few more questions that we can hopefully squeeze in before the end of the hour. There's one question here. In general, is it more effective to get a resolution passed by the city council or just to ask the mayor to sign?
Well, there's no requirement for anything other than the mayor to sign. So I'll answer it two ways. It's probably easier in many cases just to get the mayor to sign, but I think it's more powerful if the city council makes it, a resolution that includes it is policy of the city of such and such that the mayor will be, a supportive member of Mayors for Peace or something like that.
Right.
Yes, certainly.
And
It's better
sorry,
to
go
have,
ahead, Larry.
it's better to have, the whole city council and, representing the wish of their citizens, so, yeah.
And has there been any relationship or collaboration with Rotary clubs regarding the Rotarians for Peace initiative?
Not that I know of in this country, but that's sort of a new area opening up, I think, that's worth exploring, because the Rotarians have started showing up in a lot of disarmament spaces.
I've been to Haiti 4 times after the earthquake, and I could very well see how the Rotary Club was very active there in Haiti.
Here's an interesting question, challenging question, which is basically about the hypocrisy of some of our elected officials. It says, how can you take seriously, and how can Russia and China take seriously Representatives McGovern and Blumenauer, who called for these nuclear arms agreements at the same time that they're also supporting increasing the weapons sale or weapons to Ukraine. So it seems like there's a bit of a hypocrisy there. How would you respond to that?
Well, I don't think that the audience is Russia or China at this point. I think this is a message to the US government. And this is a very, very difficult, complicated, controversial question. I don't know the precise positions of those 2 members of Congress on providing military support to Ukraine, but I know that there's been some tensions within some members of Congress about trying to get as much money as they can for humanitarian diplomacy, which are also part of those packages. So, I don't see this as being hypocritical, actually. I see this as being trying to pull the United States away from its bad, nuclear behavior.
Great. Well, we are out of time. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Larry, for organizing all of this. And thank you, Mark, for co-hosting with me. And thank you, everyone, for attending. As we said, we will send out the recording and we will send out the toolkit afterwards. I think I just sort of want to emphasize, the point that you're making here, Jackie, that in the world that we live in, when these problems are humongous that we're dealing with, and yeah, it feels like Congress, Parliament, wherever you are, is gridlocked, and it's so hard to take action on the federal level, that these localized actions can make a difference, and that we can kind of build power from the grassroots up. So yeah, I guess just before we conclude, I want to turn it to you, Jackie and Larry, for any final thoughts.
Well, our work is there's a lot of work ahead of us, and I just invite anybody who's interested in pursuing this to sign up for the Mayors for Peace interest group, and let's see what can happen and what we can build. And I'll just underscore what you just said, Greta, which is, I think one of the thoughts behind the Back from the Brink campaign's approach right now is to really try to get the conversation going at the local level as a first step. And so this is another tool to help that happen.
And I'll just say that as the title of this webinar is, thinking globally, but acting locally. So I think it's important to contact our elected officials. And I think if you can get an audience with your local elected officials, starting there and then working, for your state representatives and obviously your federal elected officials. So I found that instead of writing letters, I think calling the office and even to get a phone call with a congressman to arrange for that. So, and maybe you can be a group to do that. So, and then of course, if you visit Washington, of course, to make sure to meet with your elected representatives there. So I want to thank Greta and Mark for their assistance here. Greta has been a little bit under the weather, I hear, the last couple of days, and we thank her for the special effort for this evening. And I want to thank Jackie for all her help over the years, and keep up the good work.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I have one more thing to say. And that is, I'd like to quote this Vietnamese colonel who said that in every war, it matters not who won or lost, the people always lose.
Yeah.
The people always lose. So it's we, the people, who can make a difference.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, right on. And on that note, we'll wish you all a good evening, and we'll send out the recording and the toolkit afterwards, as we said. So thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.